Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another episode of Finding Your Summit, which is all about overcoming adversity and finding your way in life. And this week we've got another fantastic, awesome, incredible guest. And I say this because I've known this guy for, 30, 40 years. It certainly dates me, but his name is Hugh Millen. And Hugh Millen is a buddy who we went to high school together, played football. He was a quarterback. I was a wide receiver. Then we went on to the University of Washington. I took a more direct path. He had to go down to a JC before he transferred, became our starter on a very successful team. We ended up number 2 in the country. And then we both ended up getting drafted in the NFL. He played 10 years. I only played 5. But nonetheless, how many guys can actually say that they went to high school together, let alone, being in the same city, town, and then making it all the way to the top of the rung, in this case being the NFL. But Hugh talks about his adversity that he went through growing up, not the greatest family life, and had a lot of stepdads in there, and some weren't so kind as others, and he had to really feel the wrath of that. But post his NFL career, he's come out, and he's been on the radio up in Seattle, really the football expert for the Seahawks and the Huskies, and is a part of the Husky Honk pre- and post-game shows for the Huskies, and they've been doing this now for 19 years. Whoa, it's a long time. So I had a ton of fun getting caught up with my old teammate, friend, and we just go through it all. So you're going to love this episode. It's a little bit longer, but we also go a little bit deeper. And what else would you expect with buddies? That's what we do. So as always, remember to rate and review. Go to iTunes, Finding Your Summit. It's all happening in the right way so that we can continue to broadcast these episodes. And on that note, let's go talk to Hugh. Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another awesome episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week, it brings a lot of meaning to me because I'm interviewing one of my longtime friends, Hugh Millen. And Hugh is just an amazing individual on so many different levels. And I've known this guy now for...
Well, I'd say pushing 40, right? 35.
35 plus.
Anyways, right?
Yeah, so we are broadcasting up here on Snoqualmie Ridge, which is about 20 miles outside of Seattle. So I flew up from LA, which I normally broadcast from Hermosa Beach. And here I am up here at your beautiful home on this great golf course.
Yeah, and if we've known each other 35 years, the big question is, do you have more dirt on me or do I have more dirt on you? So.
No, I love that because you teed it up perfectly from the standpoint of if I go down a little too far, you can just retaliate and you've got plenty of stories on me.
It wouldn't be the first time, right?
No. So that's just awesome.
No, it's good to be with the MP.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of people who know you and there's a lot of people who don't know you. And so I want to set that up first and we're going to go forward and then we're going to go backward. So for those that don't know, Hugh and I went to high school together. And how often do you get the great fortune of playing in high school with football with one of your buddies, then going on to the University of Washington in our case, and we were the quarterback receiver duo. And then we both get very fortunate to get drafted into the NFL, and he had a little bit longer career than I did. But nonetheless, what are the odds of that, of anybody making it that far? And just so proud of that fact and that he did it. And he certainly did it with a lot more odds to overcome, which we're going to get into in just a minute. But just a remarkable story. So I want to tee this up a little bit. So we go back, I think we met each other when I was probably a sophomore. Maybe you were a freshman in high school, right?
Yep.
Something like that. And you came down. So where we first kind of came together was at Roosevelt High School.
Yep. Roosevelt in Seattle, yeah.
Roosevelt
about 20 blocks north of the University of Washington, yeah.
Yep, and we just started hanging out. We had a lot in common. You love football. I love football. We both love sports. And, now we're going to the same high school together. And just you connected really well with a lot of my friends, which then obviously became your friends. And so it really started something really wonderful. But one of the things that I would come to learn more and more is just how difficult your childhood was for you. And again, I'll probably reiterate this a few times during the pod, which is just having that inner strength to kind of keep going because so many people would have quit along the way, along the journey, and you never did, and you kept going and you overcame. So for you, what was that like growing up? And by the way, I didn't know this. This is a new factoid for me that I didn't know you're born in Iowa.
Yeah, well, that just happened to be my mom and my dad. They were real young. They were 21 when they had me. And my dad was going to Michigan, and they had a brief little interlude. It was right around the time of Thanksgiving. I was actually born, here's a tidbit for you, on the actual day and year that John Kennedy was assassinated. So I was born in about 3 hours before. And so, but around Thanksgiving time, Mom was spending some time with a friend down in Des Moines, and I was early, I guess, or what have you. So yeah, no connections to Iowa in that regard. It's funny, I have gotten contact from some Iowans sending a football card or something like, hey, trying to collect all the cards from everybody from Iowa. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I don't really feel like I'm Iowan. But Mark, before we get into it, I do want to preface, look, I know that if you're looking for an interview of Steve Young or some Hall of Famer or something, this is not that interview, right? And so I was a guy very fortunate to bounce around the league, as you said, and played with 93 Pro Bowl players. And I was around some great coaches that had a total of 8 Super Bowls and what have you. So I was able to see that, and I'm grateful for the career I had. But I think in that respect, I acknowledge that if there's anything to be taken, it would be just kind of, hey, just an ordinary Joe. And I had an ordinary career in the NFL. But nonetheless, blessed to accomplish some things and be on a really good college football team and be on a Super Bowl champ. And so I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Well, and that's fine. I appreciate that. But truth be told, this podcast is about overcoming adversity and finding your success. And there's only about 1 billion people out there, little boys who would dream one day to play in the NFL, and you actually did it. And I had my 15 minutes of fame too, but I still had it. Right. And I experienced that. And I got to play with a bunch of Pro Bowl guys too and their friends, and great locker room and camaraderie. And I was never a great NFL player, but those memories are forever and you can't take those away. And the coaches and all the influences and the positive things from the players like John Elway and Marino and all these guys that you got to play behind, to anybody, it's a dream life. When you're the super duper 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 of the lucky that got up there, you do make the Pro Bowl and you do become great. But that was not my destiny, and that wasn't your destiny. But what was your destiny is to keep going.
It was. And yeah, I think that we can all take snippets from people's lives and try and gain wisdom, right? That's the best source of wisdom, is to not just experience things and maybe learn from our own lessons, but learn from the lessons and the lives and the experience of others. So I think in that regard that maybe we can share something that can be helpful. But you're talking about guys that aspire to make the NFL. When you're a kid thinking about being in the NFL, you're in a list of, first of all, we know, get in line with 10 million other kids. Everybody wants to be in the NFL when you're playing. And you don't have that dream, well, I'm going to be a backup most of my career and play for 5 teams. And when I do finally get to start, within a couple of years, they're going to just blow me out of there. But in that regard, you remember the movie Amadeus from '84? Best Picture, I believe it was. And it depicts a guy, a composer at the time, a contemporary of Mozart, a guy named Salieri, who he was almost driving himself mad because he had this jealousy for Mozart, right? That Mozart had all this talent. And there's a line in there, and I think F. Murray, I don't know, you'll have to look up. Whoever played Salieri, he got an Academy Award. But there's a line in there, and he says, Lord, why do you implant in me the desire to be this great composer and then deny me the talent? And in some ways, you and I kind of lived that. You would have loved to have a Steve Largent career and be wearing a yellow jacket. I backed up Troy Aikman and John Elway and Dan Marino. All 3 of those guys have yellow jackets because they're in the Hall of Fame. And I would have loved to have had that. That's the dream I had. So in that sense, I kind of have that kinship with Salieri. Salieri was a fairly accomplished composer at his time, but nothing of any real significance, right? But he was a contemporary again of Mozart, who was brilliant. So when I'm sitting there and I'm practicing, and John Elway is doing things that I could only dream of it's like, God, you give me you're knocking on the door, but we didn't go all the way with the talent.
Yeah, but the way I look at that too a little bit is what I was given is opportunity, right? And then once you get that opportunity, then you're thinking about it as possibility, right? Because what you're talking about really is hindsight. As you're going into those different teams, the Broncos, the Dolphins, some of these other places, they already had great quarterbacks, as you mentioned, but you never know when injury is going to strike. Joe Theismann, where he breaks his ankle in half, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, in most of these teams, you got an opportunity to go in and play because they got hurt, right?
Yeah, and when I got the opportunity, I did just enough to keep a job, but not to make a real mark on the league. And I don't want to blame it, okay, God didn't give me enough talent. I'm just saying that I think if you're talking about real reality versus theory, in theory, we should all be grateful for the blessings we have, right? And I think we all are. There's times where we're contemplative about those blessings, which I'm so blessed. And as you mentioned, hey, even for us to have played Even a down is a great blessing because most people don't experience that. I'm just saying in reality, you do find yourself, it's like money. You always think that the next guy who has a little bit more money than you, oh, he's rich, right? There's just certain fallible nature to our human existence. We wrestle with, we know we need to be grateful, and that's a cognitive thought. That's a intellectual conclusion. Be grateful. But the fallible part of our emotions is we have to wrestle with not being envious of others. Or that's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? Or not taking accountability for our own failings. If I didn't do the job, if John Elway got hurt, I start a game. If I don't win that game or I don't play well, hey, I had the opportunity. The time for me to shine was then, and I didn't do it. Guys did it. Kurt Warner did it from a lot worse circumstance than me, right? Coming off a stocking shelf. So it can be done. Kurt Warner proved it. And then when you prove that like Kurt Warner did, well, then he's wearing a yellow jacket.
Well, look, it's not all about wearing the yellow jacket, of course, right? It's about being the best that you can be. And that's one of the reasons why I love football versus maybe a sport like tennis, right? Where it's individual. And that it truly is about being a team. Our mutual great buddy, Jim Mora, who's now the head football coach at the University of Washington, he's the head football coach at the UCLA Bruins, played with us at the University of Washington. And he was never a starter, but he was a key role player for that backup position, right? And so
in the biggest game of the year against Michigan, he goes in there and he gets the game ball because he has double-digit tackles because he's ready to play.
Yeah. So, to me, look, we all want it. You don't go like, hey, my goal in life is to be number 2. And so we all want to be number 1. But sometimes, like you're saying, your talent only takes you so far. And it is what it is. And so you have to be grateful for those moments. And especially when you look back and just know how blessed that we were to be able to play with a lot of great players and be in that arena. But what I want to do right now is, because we kind of jumped over it just a little bit, but I want to get into, again, so you're in Iowa, right? And how you meander your way. It's like, okay, you're 2 days old and you're in Iowa, and like now you're 15, and that's where I connect in with you, and you're in Seattle. And I know you kind of grew up in that kind of the north end part of Seattle.
We bounced around a lot. We lived in the central part of Seattle. We had only been in Iowa for a couple of weeks, and then we're in Ann Arbor because my dad was finishing up at the University of Michigan. Again, he was 21 when he had me. And then we moved out, I think, when I was 2 to Seattle. So I consider myself a Seattleite because that's my first memory.
Yeah. So why did you bounce around a lot?
Well, my mom just was, I want to honor her in her passing. She passed in 2007, but facts are the facts that she had, a number of broken marriages, and 7 to be precise. And so, as you might imagine, when you're a child of that, the first divorce to my dad was age 4. And so now I have a new stepdad. And from there, just the nature of the relationships and how she was in and out of relationships led to a kind of a nomadic existence there for a while.
Yeah. So, that'd be difficult for anybody. I went through a split with my longtime now ex, and the hardest part of that whole thing is just what it does on the kids, and just it's awful. It's awful. And then to have to repeat that multiple times for any kid, it's an unstable situation. So I know what kids like more than anything is stability. And when there's not stability and that consistency with the same school, the same friends, the same house that you're in, and that just creates a lot. So I think for me, where we connected first in high school, I think I didn't know all the reasons why, but you were spending a lot of time at my house with my parents. Kind of grew up in the OP.
Leave it to Beaver.
Leave it to Beaver, type environment, which was great. And my parents were wonderful and awesome, and they brought you in, and there was really no questions asked, really. It was just like, hey, here's my buddy, and he needs to stay here tonight. And they said, great, right? And so that was a wonderful thing for you to be able to do that. Okay, so we're talking about you're 4 years old, right? And now you're displaced. Do you remember that time when you were going through it? Were you too young, or was that just the beginning of many things to come?
Well, it was a difficult time, and I'm not the first kid, obviously, to be in the midst of a divorce, but now I've got a stepdad. He was a heavyweight boxer. He fought George Foreman. He fought Ken Norton. In fact, he went 10 rounds with Ken Norton. The last fight Ken Norton had before he broke Muhammad Ali's jaw, he fought my stepdad 3 months before. And my stepdad was able to go 10 rounds with him. Now, he lost a unanimous decision, but he had at least 3 rounds by every judge. And so you can imagine a heavyweight boxer, very intimidating, very abusive in the house to my mother, abusive to my brother and me. a lot of abuse on a pretty continual basis, like from age 4 to 7 or 8. There's a guy that we're living a part of town where one of the only white kids going to school in central Seattle. And that was okay for me, kind of connected with the kids. I don't remember having problems with the kids. I was, an athlete, so I was kind of connected on some levels. My brother had maybe had a little bit more time, but at the house, it's tough when you're getting the crap beat out of you by a heavyweight boxer. So kind of fearful when a guy walks up the stairs every day when he comes home. And I share that because at age 53, I kind of always knew when we were getting whacked around. When my mom would cower, he'd raise his hand and she'd go to protect herself and blame things that she had done on my brother and me, try and turn the physicality back on my brother and me. I knew all that stuff was wrong. Even at 6, I knew that it wasn't right. And, I had times where if I would have just lifted the back of my shirt and showed my teacher that you could touch your finger and blood would come up because you got beat so bad with a belt, that he'd go to prison, and certainly now, it was a different day and age back then. But when you get beat like that, obviously it's frightening, but I felt like during that time, I was always knowing right and wrong. And I said, okay, this isn't right. I think that's an important part for me. I'm not trying to project my philosophies on anybody else, but for me, I always felt like, hey, I know right from wrong, and I'm accountable for my own actions. I cannot blame anything that I've experienced, because I can always find somebody who experienced worse than me, much worse. But, it wasn't an ideal situation. And then we ended up moving down to East LA, if you know that song with Bruce Springsteen, Born in East LA. So now I'm just about the only white kid in that school. And some heavy, heavy racial tension to the point of, here in elementary school, they had a rule. There was no talking in the lunchroom. If you spoke anything, you'd have to go up by the window and put your elbows on the window. Can you imagine walking into an elementary school? Think about that. An elementary school lunchroom, kids all pent up with their energy, and it's stone silent. And they got monitors at every couple of tables. And if somebody even talked, because there had been so much tension. So I can recall at some point with all of this, and I can connect with some of the emotions of minorities in this sense. I remember saying, I got the perfect solution, Mom. Just paint me black. Just paint me black. Because it seemed like that was kind of the world. But nonetheless, we got through it, and then we forge on.
Yeah, there's two things that strike me with that. Is one, you had you're talking about such a young age, formative age, and that you had the maturity to know between right and wrong, as you talked about. And the second part of that is, I think a lot of times that kind of behavior is mimicked back on other people. And so now you turn into a bully, right? Or whatever that is, of getting in fights, picking on people. And I know your brother Jim too. And he's just a good guy. You guys have kind hearts. And so from the standpoint of growing up in a harsh environment like that and then bouncing around and it's not stable, to not carry that anger, or maybe you did have anger, but it didn't come out in the way that you treat others. You always treat others with respect and humility. It's really amazing.
Well, a fish doesn't have a concept of water. I don't know how my life would have been different. I judge myself I tried to live a life that God would want me to live, but I also know the impurity of my thoughts, the impurity of my actions and my words. And so I think we can all look and say, boy, we fall short of where we need to be. At that time, and maybe, I think, again, the purpose here is if somebody can relate to some of the stings of life. And I can remember one time there was a little landing on the stairway, and this guy's got the belt out, and he's just going and going and going, just flailing on the belt. And we had extension cords and all this stuff, but the belt, to the point where we basically were just about to bleed. And right around the corner, there was a sofa, and my mom was sitting, just sitting on the sofa, and it would be over her shoulder, and she had her legs crossed on the couch in a really casual way. And it's really hard when I was either 6 or 7 at the time, but the belt is just coming and coming and coming. And you're looking around a corner, and your mom is just sitting there with her legs crossed. And she was gripped by fear. There was nothing she was going to do because she was scared for her own safety. But maybe somebody can remember a point in their life where they said, boy, that stung. Just something happened with my parents that just rips your heart out. You just have to be strong. I'm talking about my philosophy to myself. because I don't feel like...
Well, look, you're a parent. You've got two awesome
Yeah.
boys, and I've got two awesome girls, right? And at the end of the day, kids look to their parents for protection, right? We were supposed to protect them from all bad things that are out there and not be the people that are out there creating havoc. And so I just can't even imagine what that would be like. Do you think then that your sports, because you have to gravitate towards something. So, you're going through something awful like this, right? And you're enduring this pain and it's consistent. So even when he just even starts to unloosen his belt, even if he's just taking his pants off, you're like, oh my God, am I going to get this? Do you think, your love of sports came from that was your refuge?
It's a great question, again, because don't know how I might have gravitated to sports had I not gone through some of those experiences. But I think for me, I can recall this. I can recall loving Mondays. Being a first, second grader, I remember being on the back of the bus, and I loved Mondays and I hated Fridays. I hated Fridays because that meant I had to be at home. And so I actually became a good student. I think I developed affinity to school because I just would much rather be at school than be at home. Fridays were a terrorizing day and Mondays were a relief. Thank God it's Monday. Whoever says that. But for me, Mondays were not blue. Mondays were bright and sunny just because you knew that you weren't going to get terrorized at school, right? So as far as sports, I think that, as a guy that most sports came pretty good to me, I describe myself as a good athlete, but not the type of a guy. There's great athletes, the kind of guys that people talk about, like some guy, this can do everything. He can water ski and he can pole vault and he can throw a ball over a mountain. And everybody knows that athlete. You were more that guy than me. I was 6'5" and I had really large hands and I had a skill to throw a football. But as far as, I'm not the last guy you're going to pick on a basketball court, but I'm nothing special. So I think athleticism did help in some of those ways, like I said, relating to some of the kids in the inner city. There's no doubt about that. But I think I would have been driven to play that out, had a more conventional upbringing or not.
Well, I know one thing as we now kind of move into high school, that when you and I got connected, again, I was a sophomore, I think you're a freshman, I hung out with all these just great guys, right? From the Brian Careys to Rick Andersons and a bunch of guys like that, Dave Mader, and everybody just liked you. And so, I mean, it's always nice in a big high school like that, especially when you've had some chaos in your background, to come in and have your friends now be your best buddies, and everybody accepts you and they bring you in, and now you're starting to become part of that team, not just on the field, but off the field. And from my perspective, at least, I think a lot of that happened, to you. So it was just a great way to have a guy who nobody knew to come into the group and be accepted.
Absolutely. And you were a leader of that group, and it was a great group, and you're ahead in school, but I was in school early. So really calendar-wise, it's 2 years. And so I had done so much moving around that I didn't have those deep roots with friends like you did in the area. And so now we're at high school, and it was really, I think, profound for me to be accepted into that group. And because I was just felt like a young guy that I had acceptance. And so sports was a great vehicle in that regard. And I think a lot of people have experienced that. But pivotal time in life, obviously those high school years are hard on everybody, but the social part of it can be really tough. And it was a great group of guys you were hanging with. And I'm still, as you said, friends with those guys to this day. And my life is the better for it.
Where did you play your freshman football? I don't recall that.
Yes, I was involved in the youth football, both freshman and sophomore year, outside of Roosevelt. And I had lived up in the north part of Seattle, the shoreline area. So I was playing youthful football up there. And when it came to freshman and sophomore football, my thought was, wait a minute, I can play 10 or 11 games and have an opportunity to win a championship in youth football. Or if I'm on a freshman team, they might play 4 or 5 games and you're just scout team fodder for the varsity. And the experience I thought would be more rewarding and enriching. But that didn't help me now in high school because I'm playing football not only away from the high school, but geographically several miles away. So by the time I actually played high school football, I was a junior. So we're talking about that period of time when now I'm transitioning from, okay, who's this guy that was playing Little League football 10 miles away? And now what does he mean to our team?
Well, it was funny. And the irony of all this, and the reason why I'm bringing it up is because when I was a senior and you're now a junior, you were going to be our quarterback. I had been a receiver 2 years before that as a sophomore and junior. We had an all-state quarterback. And you were a kid, like as you said, that had grown to, you're what, 6'3", 6'4", 6'2", 6'3"?
Well, my junior year, I was barely over 6 feet and about 160. I was 15 years old.
You're 15, but you had lower 15 feet, size feet. It was just...
Yeah.
By the time you said hike at that time and you dropped 5 steps back, And based on our line and the people that we had up front, it was just a challenge to get the ball out in the passing game to me. So anyways, they brought me in. I played quarterback. My senior year, it'd be your junior year. So then the following year, I went on to the University of Washington as a receiver, and then it was your time to shine, you and Dean Baker, and you guys went out. You had a pretty good senior year. I think you're all Metro, right?
Yeah, I was. But you see, your rendition of this is a little different than my rendition. Now, there's some humility that you've interjected that we can all appreciate, but your junior year, you're a player of the year in the conference as a receiver. But again, that was my sophomore year. Nobody had seen me. So when the coach was planning for the team, the understanding I had, they had already planned to move you. And if my memory is that they had already planned to move you to quarterback and take advantage of your athleticism with the thinking that I just wasn't ready, which I readily admit right now I wasn't ready. So now you become player of the year in the conference as a quarterback your senior year. You're back-to-back player of the year in the conference, one as a receiver and as a quarterback. And so you had size and the stature and the athleticism and pretty darn good quarterback. And I don't know that the opportunity was initially there. Now, there's no question that they flirted around with it, but I wasn't ready. The times I had to play, I didn't know anything about reading defenses. I didn't know anything about anything. So you were the deserving starter that year.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a long list of guys that have gone through and have got disappointed because things didn't go quite right and because they didn't have the family stability and maybe the dad, father figure to say, no, you're going to stick in there, the mom, hardcore, going, you're not going to quit. You didn't. Again, whether it was refuge or you just felt like that's where you want to be or you understood your role, the bottom line is you didn't quit and you kept your eye on the ball with that I was going to graduate and beyond and you were going to have your turn, which you did. And then when you did well enough to gain a little bit of interest around, and you ended up going down to Santa Rosa. Again, it probably wasn't the exact way you may have drawn it up, but everybody's got different paths. But at the end of the day, it all led to the right role.
So the picture is, you describe it exactly right there. So you play your senior year. Now, this is the Metro League, wasn't well funded. We had 7 regular season games. So now I'm a senior. I get a concussion in the first series of the first game. So now I'm down to 6 games. I made all league and all, but I was getting some token interest from different schools, but no scholarship offers came. And the coach just said, look, you've played 6 games of high school. You got to play. Every game I played as a senior I was a 16-year-old. I was slated, I guess my DNA, to grow another 2 inches. I grew 2 inches after my 17th birthday. I played every game as a 16-year-old. So I think where there may be a story is sometimes when we don't have the success we want, because at that point we were all kind of measuring the scholarship offer. You're at Washington, and I think all kids are saying, hey, I want to play in the Pac-10 at the time, or maybe it was even Pac-8. Probably Pac-10, yeah. But now it's the Pac-12. So that idea, okay, I didn't meet my goal. Why? Is there another way? The front door is closed. Is there a side door? Is there a back door? Is there another route I can take? Is there a circuitous route? I had kind of resolved that I was going to let the game tell me that I could no longer play. Now, you would think that would have happened after an Eastern Washington. Now, this is not Washington. This is not Wazoo, Washington State University, Pac-10. This is Eastern Washington. Has a scout, comes in and looks at my tape. And he was there for a long time, looked at a bunch of the game.
This is when you're done?
My senior year in high school.
Okay.
Senior year in high school. Got it. And I talked to him after he had watched all this tape, and he seemed to take a little delight in looking me in the eye and saying, well, looked at a lot of tape. He said, and my conclusion is you're not the caliber of player that we're looking for at Eastern Washington. It's like, okay, that's a big dagger. There's people that are going to tell you stuff. And you know what? I'm not saying it was a flawed analysis. At the time, it was probably the right analysis. Now, I think on a personal level, he probably took a little too much glee. Maybe he was frustrated in his own job, but he seemed to really enjoy telling me that I wasn't a caliber player at Eastern Washington.
Yeah, listen, I did go to the University of Washington my freshman year, and I was really lost in the program. I hadn't dedicated myself. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't emotionally, physically, mentally, all that stuff. And I can remember like it was yesterday. Like we're sitting here having this conversation, and there was this very well-known booster that he was about 10 yards behind us. I was on the sideline. I'd come out on a play, and I can remember him turning to one of his other buddies and talking about me. I could overhear it saying that was one big waste of a scholarship. And that stung, right? Just like it stung for you. But what it did, too, is make me just like grind my teeth and clench my fist and like, I'm going to show that guy, right? And it did. So that's part of the story. It's about you've got choices. You can take door number 1 or door number 2. And far too many people quit and give up and don't go the full mile. I think as it relates to just this story, you had to take kind of the road less traveled, right? So rather than go to the 4-year school like I got to go to, you said, you know what, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to have the guy from Eastern Washington in a low D1 conference tell me what I can and cannot do. But I do need to go get more playing time. And so you and Dean Baker end up going down to Santa Rosa Junior College, right?
Yeah, at that time, the receiver, like you said, really good friend to this day, friend of ours, Dean, wonderful presence in my life. But we went to Santa Rosa Junior College. It was exactly what I needed to do. And that had been recommended by our high school football coach, Art Wiper. And he had a connection there. And he said, you know, you need to play. You need to see where you're at. And it made a lot of sense, both from a football standpoint. My dad was thrilled because at that time you could go to gain residency in the state of California. And he had told me, look, I will help you pay for state school. Because I could have got on to the University of Washington. I could have gone in, not played or walked on or something if they would have taken me. But now I'm going to California and I'm going to get established residency. Now I can go to UCLA or Cal or any place, UC Irvine, whatever, and I can pay rather in-state residence. So that made a lot of sense both on the football front and on the academic front.
So now you're down there for 2 years, right? And you start and you're playing, you're doing the things that you needed to do, which is just get out there and develop physically, mentally, emotionally, all those things. But the bottom line, you're playing football. So what was it, again, your position now where you're down in California, you're having some success on the field, you're throwing the ball, you're making some yards, and now you want to continue that path. So now you're looking at going to a 4-year school. And all I remember, my version of the story is I get a call on the phone. And again, back in those days, there was no cell phones. That was the old house number. You pick it up and there's you. And you're calling me from a payphone or something. And you're inquiring about potentially walking on the University of Washington, what I thought your prospects might be. That's how I recall it. I mean, I didn't know how you developed. I really hadn't followed your career. But I did know that there's a guy named Steve Plur that was going to be there for another year, and he was going to start, but there was an opportunity that you could come on, assess your talent during the spring, and then you could either leave or stay or whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So
as you're answering that question, also UCLA, why not Cal, Stanford, you're down there, right?
Sure. So the short version is after playing 2 years at the JC, the head coach at the junior college said, hey, where do you want to go? What are your eye on? And for a few reasons, whether it was the degree or the level of play, I said San Diego State. I'm interested in San Diego State. So he says, okay. He sends out some tape, some film, and next scene is San Diego State's recruiting me really hard. Really hard is relative. Johnny Elway gets recruited really hard. I was not being recruited really hard. Okay, so let me check myself. But for me, having not experienced much in Eastern Washington, that comment, to me, I was the Pied Piper. So I go down there, they fly me down, recruiting visit. Doug Scoville was the head coach, kind of a quarterback guru, and he appeared to be really enthusiastic. We're going to do this, this, and this. This is the plans. And I'll always wonder, the head coach had kind of said he's going to go to San Diego State no matter what. And I'll always wonder if they would have given me a scholarship had he not said that. But in the end, they just assumed that I was going to walk on anyways. But they sure talked a lot about the plans they had. So now I'm like, okay, I'm going to San Diego State. So I come back.
Again, as a walk-on?
This is after my second year. I'm going to go with San Diego State, but it's it was strange because we had already divulged we're going there no matter what. So who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe if I'd have said, look, I'm not going a year unless I get a scholarship. Who knows how they would have. But now, and this is an interesting story I think we can all relate to, because at some point, there's probably a point in your life where your course was balanced on a blade of a knife and you didn't even know it. And what I tell my kids is, hey, look, the choices you make, I want you to imagine you're 17. I want you to imagine your 37-year-old self and your 57-year-old self, your 77-year-old self talking to you now, because decisions you're making are affecting your 57-year-old self, right? So this was kind of one of those times. I come back to Seattle after 2 years of playing junior college. It's the winter. It's Christmas vacation. I come up. I remember walking on the University Ave down in Seattle, the University of Washington campus, cold. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm a California dude now. I'm going back to California. I'm going to San Diego State. I was dead certain of how my life was going to go at that point. Well, my youth football coach that I talked about that I felt compelled to go play for instead of high school football, he was having a party. Happened to be in the Roosevelt area, just coincidentally at Hawthorne Hills, but that's just for Seattle people. But he invites me to a Christmas party. So I can remember not even knowing if I was going to go to that party, but didn't have anything going on. So I go to this Christmas party. It was probably a week before Christmas. It's at his parents' house. There wasn't a lot for me to talk to. And I was about to leave. And the coach was in conversation. Sorry, I'll hurry this up. But he finds a time to break away and he says to me, so what's going on with football? And I tell him all about the experiences. And he's looking at me and goes, you should go to the University of Washington. Steve Pelor is going to be leaving, and there's going to be an opening. And I remember the first thought, man, are you crazy? I'm going to San Diego State. And he says, I don't know, because you should go to the UW. He was very definitive. So I walked out of that party, and it didn't even register, right? But somehow it was like he planted a seed, and the seed wasn't there in that conversation. It wasn't there the next morning. But I get back down to Santa Rosa, and somehow that seed was growing. I did a lot of thinking. I'd go across and shoot baskets. I kept thinking, if I'm going to play college football, I'd way rather do it at the Pac-10 and have a chance to play in Rose Bowls and big bowls and what have you. So I start thinking about this. And next scene is Ray Dorr, the quarterback coach, calls me. And it's the only word I can think of is perfunctory. Perfunctory meaning just as out of a sense of obligation but no passion. Ray Dorr calls me, he goes, Hugh, there's a coach named John Fonstock you used to play for. Now, I had known Ray Dorr from our camps. He says, he made me promise that I would call you. So here's the call. You want to come up and walk on to the University of Washington? The invitation's there. All good? All good. Click. Yeah. I mean, just
that's a sweet
thank boy, oh boy. And so now, there was just no sales in it whatsoever. And yet I still, day after day, I'm going and shooting these baskets and thinking, and somehow the tide kind of turned, the worm turned, and now all of a sudden I just somehow locked into, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it in the Pac-10. I want to do it in the big time. And so despite the fact that they weren't really warm and fuzzy about inviting me up, that conversation that I had at that Christmas party, that I almost didn't even go to that, absolutely would have never gone to Washington. So I think we all probably have those times where, looking back, life could have taken a vastly different turn. And so I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I probably wouldn't have taken a course where I met my wife, wouldn't have my kids.
No, well, that's just life though, right? And that's everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll still go back to, there's always actions and then becomes reactions, right? And your action was to kind of listen to your inner voice and your heart and where you want to go. And you did grow up here. And so you had a lot of friends. I was on the team, so I was an ally.
That was a big, huge part of it, too.
So I could give you kind of my bias about what was going on. It pretty much matched what Coach Ray Dorr, quarterback coach, was saying, too, about if you want to come on. But I was a little bit more candid about what I thought your choices might be after Steve had gone on. But
I'm going to interrupt you, Mark, because while my old coach was really excited for me to come up here, and Ray Dorr, the quarterback coach at Washington, was not excited, when I then called you having that excitement about, hey, it'll be great football-wise. Not necessarily great. Let me strike that. It's kind of what you described. Like, okay, this is the reality. There can be an opportunity if you work hard and you can perform, a potential opportunity. But you saying, hey, here's the living situation, here's the social situation. Now I could start to envision my life in Seattle again, which really was going to center around my friendship with you and your parents' willingness to take me in. And so that part was a huge catalyst for me in the decision.
Well, it was great. And I tell my kids this all the time. You make decisions, and decisions don't have to be permanent, right? You can always change those things. My daughter started off at Arizona, and now she's at USC right after 2 years. So those things can happen. So you come to the University of Washington. You're out there during spring ball. You're assessing it. It went well for you. That's what I remember. You're getting more comfortable. You're living with me, with my parents in the basement, and joined the Fiji House. So you have a lot of really good positive momentum going for you, and now you're getting bigger and stronger. And I think that next year you're committed to the University of Washington. You and I are out there every day lifting and throwing, and the rest of the guys. And I think that, didn't you redshirt that next year?
I redshirted the first year.
No,
so you're a redshirt junior.
I'm a redshirt junior.
Steve Pelor is the Pac-12 Player of the Year.
Pac-10 Player of the Year.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
12 now, 10 then.
Yep. So he has a big year, and things are going well for me and the rest of the team. And we end up in Hawaii, I think, missed out on the very last game of the year. Get beat by Washington State. Otherwise, we would have gone back to the Rose Bowl. That would have been so sweet. This is, again, there's these constant, moments of truth where you could have quit, but you didn't. You could have quit, but you didn't. You couldn't have quit because other people, circumstances, everything else. There's a quarterback who I think ended up playing 17 years NFL, Chris Chandler, who also was on the team. And so everybody just assumed that Chris Chandler, the scholarship player, was going to be the quarterback going in. But you guys battled that next spring, and as you came out of it, you earned a scholarship, and you end up, the walk-on ends up beating out the highly celebrated, highly recruited Chris Chandler, who would go on to play in a Super Bowl and some Pro Bowls in the NFL. I mean, that just took a lot of inner strength to pull that off. And you have the talent. There's no question. The numbers didn't lie, so they didn't give that to you. But I always looked at it that any walk-on that actually ended up playing had to almost, like, I'm going to say this wrong, but double up to catch up, right? They had to be twice as good as a scholarship guy. They got the worst shoes, their hand-me-down shoes and the shirts and everything else in a walk-on locker room back in those days. And so they didn't make you feel exactly like you're top-notch at the U. But what a great achievement to go from this crazy background, this living situation, bouncing all over, not knowing where you're going to be, ended up not getting a scholarship like I did to the University of Washington, ended up walking on, going to a junior college down in California. And then you have some different choices. You're still not getting the full-on scholarly to the next level, going up, whether it be San Diego State or the University of Washington. You roll the dice again, you come on up, actions create reactions, and you do the things that you needed to do, which is get bigger, stronger, faster, understand the game. And you did all those things, and then you were rewarded, something that you earned, to go out there and be our starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. My senior year, this would be your junior year, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that's the sequence. And there's the legendary basketball coach, Al McGuire at Marquette. He tells the story that his son was playing for him at Marquette, point guard of the team. And another kid comes into his office and says, Coach McGuire, hey, I'm working hard. I'm doing all this stuff. I think I'm just as good as point guard as your son. And McGuire turned to me and says, look, I love my son. And for you to be the point guard, you're going to have to be better than my son, right? And so in that regard, I think the scholarship guys are going to win all ties.
Yeah.
They're going to win all
for
ties.
For sure, 100%.
And so Chris Chandler, deservedly so, had been a parade All-American at high school in Everett, 3-sport, all-state, baseball, basketball, football. If you're a parade All-American, you're a 5-star recruit. Stanford offers Michigan. Very, very highly touted guy. For me, when I got to Washington, knowing that I was going to have to compete against him, I gave a real thorough examination of what they call it a SWOT analysis. I was looking, okay, can I beat this guy out? And for me, what helped me is that what I realized when I got to Washington, that I had never been taught how to play quarterback. I didn't know the first thing about reading cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, cover 1, nothing. Because back in high school, I'd just go back and look for you or Dean or something, and I have no clue on a plan. And same thing at the junior college. So within 2 or 3 weeks, I had a functional foundation. It only took 2 to 3 weeks to have a functional foundation to read defense. And that's it. At that point, I got momentarily a little bit bitter. Like, how come I never learned this? Why didn't I take it upon myself to try and figure this stuff out or what have you? So I think maybe a lesson there is that sometimes when things aren't going, maybe there's a certain skill set or something or some aspect of what you're aspiring to do that you got to do it. You got to educate yourself. That maybe you've got the potential, but you just haven't gained the expertise in it. You haven't given yourself a chance because you haven't given yourself a toolbox, which is the knowledge to be able to do the job. And so at any rate, that was the challenge for me to try and beat out Chris in practice to gain the favor and the ultimate decision that Don James would say, okay, we're going to go with this walk-on as opposed to the 5-star.
So now we go into our senior year, and I can't remember who we played our first game. Northwestern. So we played Northwestern at home, because the year before we played them back in Chicago. And
I'm going to interrupt you before you get to that, because you had said about at that time, what I realized was when you're trying to climb the ladder, there are some people that want to grab your ankles and pull you down. They don't want you to be successful, or they have a lid on themselves. I have a good friend, a mutual good friend of ours, looked me right in the eye and said, if you think you're going to beat out Chris Chandler, you are absolutely high. He didn't say it with malice. I think he was just trying to help me.
I had the same thing. People look at me right in the eye and say, you will never play it down the NFL. I mean, friends of mine looking at them like, really?
Thanks for the sport, right? I think that the takeaway for me there was some people are going to put limitations on themselves. They're going to put the ceiling on for themselves, and don't let them put the ceiling on you. That was kind of my way of processing that, is that I'm going to try and soar like an eagle. I may crash and burn, but I'm not going to let other people grab my ankles and hold me down and believe what they're telling me when I have a chance to push through.
What you did. So that's about the human potential, right? And the other part of that too, and I think you did a great job of this, because I was that for you and you were that for me, and we had a lot of other guys that were that for us, which is surround yourself with positive voices. And we also had a head coach that created this pyramid of success of what was really a model of John Wooden in terms of the foundational building blocks that you need to build on to get to that pinnacle. So you didn't come in from Santa Rosa at the top of the pinnacle, which is the national chip and starting quarterback. You had to learn the system. You had to get bigger. You had to get faster. You had to get more accurate. You had to learn the quarterback position. You had to learn every position on the team. You had to become a leader. And those are all part of those blocks that John Wooden, that was later adapted by our coach, Don James, would give you some of those tools in your toolbox.
You have to come in and you have to have the emotional strength to push through and not doubt yourself. recognize that not every day is going to be a winning day. But you don't have to win every day. What you have to do is you have a bad day in practice, don't get down and then let that carry over and create 2 bad practices. Or maybe it's just a throw. Maybe it's just one throw. You got to re-rack it and be ready to be emotionally strong for the next play. There are a ton of lessons learned through that period of time. And, I'm also grateful that Don James had enough stature at the time that he didn't have the pressure to play Chris Chandler, that he could say, if we think that this guy has won the job, then he's got the job.
So the other thing I think that was really incredible about that period of time, too, is that because there were 2 or 3 star scholarship quarterbacks, that didn't sit great with them either. So to have to go in those meeting rooms every day and have those jealousies, and we don't have to get into too much of that. I'll just make the comment on that. But again, it was for all the positivity that was going on, there was the negativity within the meeting room, within the structure of just that small quarterback group, right? Just because you had done kind of the impossible.
Well, I don't want to portray that as typical, because in my career thereafter, at least professionally, always got along with all the quarterbacks, and whether they were ahead of me or below me, whether I was a starter, which didn't happen often, I was usually the backup. I got along with the starter, or if there's a third string guy, I got along with the third string guy. And I think that's the norm. I think most guys are supportive now. It is tough at the quarterback position because there's only one guy. But any of that may have happened at Washington, I don't think that that's necessarily typical.
I don't think so either, but I also, in a lot of guys' cases, when you're always the star from day one, and you're the star, all the way up through the chain, and then all of a sudden, when everybody thinks you're going to be the star, and now you're in a very high-profile position, a high-profile college, under a high-profile coach, and that doesn't go your way, and this is the first time you've dealt with that kind of adversity, it's tough.
Yeah. Well, that could happen in the business world. Somebody's the all-star sales guy, and he's got a certain position, and then somebody else may come along, and if he outduels them in a sale, now all of a sudden, how does he handle that adversity, that guy? Does he take it out on other people? Everybody has different wiring and different value system and different maturity levels, and that compels them to respond to things differently. But I think for the most part, at the professional level, they handle it professionally, but there's no question that from time to time, those issues do arise. But it doesn't just have to be a quarterback meeting room. I think it happens in all walks of life. Again, envy being one of the real blights on humanity. The Bible talks about that, the 7 deadly sins. And I think we all at some point are not necessarily gripped, but we are challenged by envy. I think anybody who says they haven't been is lying. And you confront those situations, I think we have to try and make the emphasis our personal integrity, be really dying to do the right thing. And we all fail in that regard, but that's what we should be trying to do.
Look, at the end of the day, I think anybody who doesn't get exactly what they deserve has to look internally at what they do, because it's really individual, right? At the end of the day, it's usually the best guy wins out. And if you don't win out, then you got to look at yourself and what you can do to improve yourself, improve your game, right? So that's the way I look at it. So the first game that we talked about was Northwestern. You come out, we win the game. I can't remember all the numbers, the scores. It really doesn't matter. But what I did want to mention, though, is I can't remember the story, what the tie-in was for you. But the next weekend, we were getting on a plane and flying back to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so, of course, they were a highly ranked team. They had a famous quarterback, right? You remember him?
Jim Harbaugh.
Yep. And so we were going to go into the big house and go play those guys.
They were ranked number 2.
They're ranked number 2.
And they had just beat the national champion University of Miami the week before.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking like 105,000 people, something like that, right? And going into hostile territory, to say the least. But what was the tie for you? I know there was a special tie about Michigan, and now I'm thinking about, you're born in Iowa, so how would that be tied to Michigan? I mean, what was that?
Again, the Iowa thing was just part of very temporary visit my mom was making to see a friend around Thanksgiving time. But we were living in Ann Arbor because of my father, who was finishing up his degree at the University of Michigan. Again, he was only 21 years old.
Okay, you did mention that earlier.
Yeah,
okay, so I forgot. Okay, so
I grew up having lived as an infant in Ann Arbor, but my dad's degree in Michigan, you have that affinity with your father, and we had that connection. And so I had become a massive Michigan fan in the early 70s, when Michigan, frankly, was a lot better than the University of Washington. And I had adorned my whole room. I was a little bit of an artist, and I had all these posters I had drawn. I took a Ram football helmet and peeled the Ram sticker off of the blue helmet, and then painted with my own oil paints the Michigan logo, the famous Michigan helmet, and I hung it by a fishing line from the light shade in the middle of the ceiling. So I had a Michigan helmet dangling from my room. So the opportunity to go back to play Michigan at number 2, it was really one of my life thrills, was just the opportunity to play
it was kind of your vision board, right? A little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I had my vision board was a poster of Farrah Fawcett.
Well, I had that one too. Yeah, I'm a healthy red-blooded American
and a poster of the UW.
boy. But that schedule had come out about 5 years before. I remember being in high school and seeing that. And in the oddest way of analysis, I remember thinking, I want to be a player in that game, and I don't care on which team. At that point, I would have thought, boy, if I could somehow navigate to the University of Michigan or Washington, would be great. But I remember looking at that 5 years in advance saying, I want to play in that game.
Well, first thing, just side note, is that I love the Michigan Classic uniforms, their helmets, their colors, everything. I mean, it's awesome. And so now the second part of that is, here we go. We jump on a plane. We go back to Ann Arbor and got all these odds stacked against us. And what nobody knew is really how good our team was. We were loaded with talent across offense and defense, especially our defense, which would later be known as the Purple Rain.
Right around Prince time.
Yep, right around Prince time. So we go back there and we hold our own, and I think where things really broke out, and it's fun to be connected to these types of plays and the history and the lore of the University of Washington, but you launch a 73-yard pass to me over the top, and we score, you and I, and that kind of propels us out in front, and we go on to win the game. And just the enormity of what we pulled off was just like amazing, right? And I still remember going, you run out the tunnel, you hit the blue, and you run off the field. I mean, it was college football at its best.
It's great pageantry, and no, you're right on all of that. That's a good synopsis. It was a great day for the Huskies. A couple thoughts. First of all, anecdotes, since we're going in the way back time machine right now, right?
I love it.
That summer in 84, my father now was a computer programmer in the Army and lived in Germany. So the only time I got to see him was in the summer. So I went and visited him, and we took a trip. We were rubbing pennies together. We went to some nice places, and we were down in the Caribbean or something. Not the Caribbean, obviously, the Mediterranean. And there was a street vendor, a flea market type thing, where I somehow in my 20-year-old wisdom thought that there was these pants that looked like something that Willy Wonka ought to be wearing. You know, there were stripes with these funky colors, vertical stripes. Like think of Indiana basketball warm-ups, but now picture teal and peach and orange. I mean, these are hideous, but as a 20-year-old, I thought they were pretty cool, and I bought them from a flea market in Europe. So now, fast forward to the Michigan trip. As you said, that was the first time I'd ever been on an airplane for a football game. And I remember to me, these were party pants. And you and I had specific plans about where we were going to party. We were going to go to FX McCrory's after that thing and celebrate a win. But I had these pants that I wanted to wear. And so when I rolled them up and stuck them in my duffel bag, I put those pants in. Those were the party pants. And then I put the normal khakis. I rolled those khakis up for the flight back in case we lost. So I got my bag, everything, boom, boom. I'm walking out of the front door for the flight, morning of the flight. And I get about halfway to the car and I pull a 180 and I go back and I unzip my duffel bag and I take the khakis out. And I was like, hey, we're burning the boats, man. I'm going here. I'm not bringing the lost pants. I'm taking the party pants. And I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do if we lose this game. I'm taking the party pants. So it was fun to go back and win that game, as you said, and for a lot of different reasons. The pageantry of Michigan, they had always looked darker blue to me on television. You know, these are 1970s televisions. They almost looked like dark navy, but they are this royal cobalt blue, or I don't know. They were just vivid, just the colors. So I think everybody hopefully has one of those moments where they have this dream of what it could be like, and then for the most part, the dream comes true.
Well, yeah, trust me, I had plenty of those. And
it was a good day for Washington.
It was a great day for Washington. That was another one of those. But just like you, I had dreamt of that moment where you're the guy that hauls in the long pass or the go-ahead touchdown, and all those things come true in my career, but not before I practiced them 10 billion times. Now, that was just one moment, but I'd actually done those in my sleep, in my dream.
Well, you were open enough. I could have just thrown it with my left hand and hucked it out there.
Okay, so we go the rest of the season. I want to keep tying this back into, for you, it was a kind of a lifetime of start and stops, right? You'd have, relatively speaking, your childhood was rough, but then you got into some sports and you started having some success in that. And then you get to high school, and then rather than you be the quarterback, physical maturity and things didn't lend you towards being, so you had to sit a year, but then you go, and then you end up going down to Santa Rosa. And now you come to the University of Washington. Now things are going well for you. And the rest of that season, that year, we go on a roll. But once again, late in the season, and in about, I think, game 8 or so, we were playing Arizona at home, and it wasn't your best game, and they end up benching you. Right. So after all this stuff you'd overcome and you'd beaten all these odds and all the great stuff you were doing, and now you find yourself back on the bench.
Well, I think life has the setbacks. They have the triumphs. And then around the corner, it's like waves on a beach. The waves, if it's calm for now, just stand on the beach because a wave's coming, right? And I think sometimes that can be how it seems sometimes. Not that I felt like I was just waiting, when is this going to turn? But a few facts. These are undisputed. We were undefeated. We were ranked number 1 in the country in both polls. We were leading the conference in scoring. Now, I'll be the first to admit that was because we had a great defense with field position, all the turnovers they created. We weren't particularly dynamic on offense. In fact, Coach James, a few years later, was going to bring in Keith Gilbertson and totally overhaul and go shotgun and spread formation. And Gary Pinkel, you're in my offensive coordinator at the time in 1984, just said, I wish you guys could have had a chance to play in this offense. But we had, at the time, a more conservative offense, but somehow we were leading the conference in scoring. And actually on that morning, I still have the football program. I was second in the conference in passer rating, 1 point away from the lead. So we weren't amassing a lot of yards, but somehow we were doing some things in a conservative way to be at that point. And then against Arizona, I just unraveled. I had 3 interceptions. I had 2 fumbles. A couple of them were unfortunate tip. I tried to throw one into the wind, but I was basically just falling all over myself and throwing up and just awful, terrible performance. Brutally terrible performance. 5 turnovers in one half.
Pretty much.
Okay. You don't have to be a football expert to understand the significance of that. So I get benched, and I should have been benched. And I stood there, and it was some of the worst pain I've ever had. I think I mentioned taking that belt to the point of bleeding as a youngster. I think that losing the job at Washington was more painful. And even though we won, that's the challenge too, because you have to honor the game. You have to honor your teammates. And so in the midst of the joy of winning, I was just experiencing this pain. I remember driving home to our house that you and I shared, and I pulled over into the parking lot of a supermarket. And I just killed the engine, and I grabbed my stomach with both hands as if I was suffering from flu or food poisoning. And I just bent over, and I was just wretched. I was physically sick from how I had played and the fact that I had been benched. And it was just every cell in my body was just in anguish.
Yeah. Listen, we've all been there, and I've been there. So I understand that. And you're embarrassed and you're disappointed. There's a lot of emotions going through. But most of all, just not playing well. You now get benched. So now we end up having a loss against USC, and we finish out with a win against Washington State, and we end up going not to the Rose Bowl, USC went, but we end up getting chosen to go to the Orange Bowl, played in Miami against Oklahoma, and back in those days, it was with Brian Bosworth and that whole crazy crew. So we go back, and the thing that was really fun, obviously we were kind of breaking ground because Pac-10 teams back in those days didn't play in the Orange Bowl. But the fun thing was that we made the road trip. We were down in Miami for a couple of weeks. They had just crazy activities. You remember all the different cruise to nowhere and all these different parties and things that we go to after practice at nights. And you and I were hanging out down the beach a lot and windsurfing and having a ton of fun. But I just remember during that week of practice that you just had such a calm. Like you had to process all this negativity and disappointment and anguish and embarrassment and whatever other emotion that you had gone through from that benching, from that performance that day against Arizona. And you'd kind of processed it. And now you're and we're all down in Miami practicing at the University of Miami. And you just had a calm about yourself in terms of the way you were throwing, the confidence was back, and you were just in a very peaceful place. And it was really cool to see. So let's get into the game. So now we're playing against Oklahoma, and I just want to fast forward through this story really quickly. But again, you don't start. We get into, I think, late in the fourth quarter, and we're losing the game. We don't have the momentum. And so our head coach, Don James, decides to make a quarterback switch. And do you remember how much time was left in the game?
I think it was closer to 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. About 10, I think. It could have been 8. Somewhere in there. I don't think it was late in the fourth quarter. I think somewhere around mid or slightly more than half a quarter left.
Yeah, so for any Washington Husky that's listening to this podcast and remembers that game, they all know that there was a lot of crazy stuff going on from the Sooner Schooner, and you end up getting reinserted back into the game, and that was a triumph. But we still were losing, and they had momentum, and we go down. I think Rick Finney scores a touchdown, I believe. Does that sound right?
Rick Finney scored a touchdown. Yeah, I had gone in, and the first series, I was nervous. I just was uptight. I hadn't been in a game for a few months. And the enormity of the situation, I was not handling it well. I knew I wasn't really ready to perform and function on a level that you need to. For example, having been at Michigan, the mindset I was in, okay, I was ready to perform. Here, now I'm in the Orange Bowl, first series, I'm not ready to perform. And we call a screen pass, and quarterbacks are taught that if a screen pass is cluttered up, then just throw it away. Well, we call a screen pass, it's cluttered, and I throw it over the top of a halfback intentionally, and yet our center had gone out to go hike, and he thought that it got tipped. Now he's catching the ball. Center goes to catch the ball. So now it looks like I'm throwing the ball to the center. Well, that's illegal. We get the penalty, and the first series is just a mess. We punt, and what I did at that point, Mark, just from my own part in the game, I had to take a little walk, say a little prayer, get myself squared away. I was way at the other end of the bench area. And what I thought was, okay, why am I uptight? I'm uptight because everybody I know on planet Earth is watching this game. It's really big magnitude for the Huskies. That time, the Orange Bowl was the premier bowl game. And so I was just kind of thinking of the magnitude. And I had this image of a gigantic curtain, 70 feet, 100 feet tall, this gigantic canvas curtain that was just around the painted area of the field. And I thought, what if we're practicing against Oklahoma? And I thought to myself, whether I was right or whether I was wrong, whether I was convicted in this thought. They're from the Big Eight. They don't see passing teams. If we played them in a scrimmage, well, we'd rip their ass because we can throw in ways that they don't. You got to throw in the West Coast. And I just thought if that curtain was drawn, we would rip them. So that was the image I took onto the field. I just ignored everything, everybody, all the cute girls I was hoping would be impressed if I could play well. All that stuff, I just forgot about it. And I just said, we're practicing it against Oklahoma behind a gigantic curtain, and I know we're going to rip them. And now all of a sudden I had this unbelievable calm out there. I just literally felt like it was a May practice in spring ball. Just totally, I could see now. I was responsive with just everything. The state you need to be. I think you need to have a little bit of adrenaline to perform because that makes your feet quicker. That makes the ball jump off your hand more. You got a liver arm. I think you need to be an athlete. You got to have some adrenaline. Here I am as if I'm some kind of legendary athlete, but just my own philosophy.
Yeah,
I think
it's all relative, right?
But you can't have too much. And at the quarterback position, defensive lineman, if he has a ton of adrenaline, well, that's probably going to help him because he's shed block and sprint the ball and he's not going to get tired. Like a ton of adrenaline is going to help a defensive lineman. A ton of adrenaline is not going to help a quarterback. And so, at any rate, I was somehow able to affix that picture, that metaphor in my mind of playing behind the curtain.
Well, we end up going down and scoring a touchdown. And fortunately, my first catch at the University of Washington, my first touchdown was against Michigan and leaped over a guy for the last kind of second winning touchdown. And my last touchdown at the University of Washington was thrown by you, kind of in the back corner of the end zone, same type of deal on the other side. And we end up winning the game. And that really kicked off the whole controversy on who should be number one in the BCS, right? Because BYU ended up number one in the country. We ended up number two. It was a bummer, but it was what it was. And you and I kind of rode off into the sunset in terms of, for me, certainly, because I went on to play for the Raiders, get drafted. I was a senior that year. You'd come back and play again the next year. But it was just what a wonderful journey in terms of the way that particular team, which the whole team was just inducted in the Hall of Fame. I mean, how often does that happen, right? At the University of Washington. So special memories. But again, tying this thing back into this kind of not giving up and going forward and having the presence of mind and remember the tools and going back. We talked about the tools in your tool shed, about really trying to hone your skills, and when things aren't going right, what can you do about it to overcome and go forward? And you just never know the way things are going to spin out. And if you quit, you'll never know, right? So now I want to fast forward through, and I could literally talk for 3 hours on this pod with you. And I mean, there's so much history, but I want to kind of quickly go through, and I've got kind of a bottom line question. So in the NFL, you played for 10 years. Is that right?
10 plus, yeah.
Yeah, 10 plus years. So within those 10 years, you were with 5 different teams. You're drafted by the Rams, right? And then you go down there. I remember that first year, we're all excited for you, and then you break your ankle. And then the next year, you had some back problems or something. And that
was one of those wink, keep you on IRR deals. It was like a red shirt.
But it's also not helping because now they're drafting Jim Everett, who's now coming in.
Close. The quick version is when I was drafted, I was the only quarterback under 30. I was really thrilled to be with the Rams. They had to the NFC title game the year before against that legendary Chicago Bears team. They had Eric Dickerson in his prime. They needed a quarterback. So they drafted me, and I was a perfect situation. That's where I wanted to be drafted. In a scrimmage prior to the first preseason game, I shattered, just absolutely powdered my ankle. Surgery, broken bones, torn ligaments, everything. So I'm in a cast. Now, what was the dream situation is no longer the dream. And at this juncture, the Houston Oilers had drafted Jim Everett. number 3 overall pick in the draft that year. But Warren Moon was there, and I don't really know why they drafted him, but Everett was holding out. Now, in addition to my injury, Steve Bartkowski hurts his knee, and Dieter Brock, another quarterback, hurts his back. And so now they're down to Steve Dills. And so the Rams need a quarterback. Jim Everett is holding out. He and I are drafted the same year. And I'll never forget coming to the office, and Duval Love, a former guard for UCLA, says, "Did you hear about our trade?" I said, "What trade?" He says, "We traded for Everett." And me on my crutches with my cast on my leg, I just had this flush over me, almost like a state of panic. And I had to go into the men's room at the Rams facility, and I just went into maybe the only time in my life I went into the toilet, and I sat there with all my clothes on the toilet seat and just trying to absorb, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. We just traded for Jim Everett. He'd been a number 1 pick. You think of what resource you have to give up. So by the time I am out of my cast and practicing, Jim Everett, as you might imagine, is already inserted as the starting quarterback of the Los Angeles Rams.
He's well on his way.
My age.
Right. So that doesn't spell good news for you.
Yeah, that's a blow. I mean, it's a blow to the dreams. There's no question.
Again, from there, then you go into the Falcons, and from the Falcons, it was...
Well, I'm playing behind a number 1 draft pick there, Chris Miller, Pac-10 Player of the Year, and he was a top 12 or 13 pick from Oregon, and he's a year younger than me.
Yeah.
And so, and he was going to be a Pro Bowler within a few years, but I backed up him. So at this juncture now, I've played for 2 teams, but I played for alongside 2 number 1 draft picks that are essentially my age.
Well, then you end up going to New England and after the Falcons. And that seems like, okay, this now is the perfect fit. You've got this great coach that we were talking about earlier tonight, and you've got the team was, 1-15 the year before. Now you guys go 6-10 or 6-9, and you have some amazing comeback victories where you led the team to the last second touchdown. So you think it's going to be a great situation, and then you're there, and you guys seem like you have some momentum. You seem like now you have some security, and then what happened?
Well, I signed in free agency to New England, and they had been 1-15 the year before in 1990. In fact, the NFL Network named the 1990 New England Patriots as the 8th worst team of all time.
Oh, wow.
These are like the Canton Bombers from 1920, you name it. And so, but I voluntarily joined there because I had the best opportunity to play. At the time, the Chargers were a little bit interested in Dick McPherson, the head coach at the time. When he was trying to get me to play for the Patriots, he said, "Now, you tell me why the Chargers are a better situation for you than the Patriots, and don't say the beach." And in fact, the Patriots wanted me the most, and I think in life sometimes you have to recognize that. And so I had an opportunity to start there, and despite the fact they've been in 1-15, you just go in there and you try and hammer down. And we were 6-10, which is a horrible record. I get it. But in a lot of circles back there, because they had been 1-15 the year before and totally uncompetitive, the fact that we were 6-10 and many of our losses were right down to the end. And so we made absolutely no distinction in history. I get all this. That applies to so much of what we've been talking about. But again, what I said early on about just kind of average Joes having ups and downs and approach that it happens to all of us, I think is applicable. But in this case, we're 6-10. Now they come to me at the end of the year, and I end up signing the highest contract in the history of the New England Patriots franchise. They'd been around 30 years. Which was about 11 years after the Eastern Washington coach looked at me and said, "You're not the caliber player who can play at Eastern Washington." So it's kind of back up, riding good. We think we're going to be expanding on a 6-10 record, try and make a push for the playoffs and do this in stages. So we go into the next year in 92. And I separate my shoulder in the 7th play of the season. Now I try to play a little bit with that, and it becomes a 3rd degree, which is the worst kind of separation. And we go 2-14, and the new broom sweeps wide. So I was going to be off to Dallas, traded to the Cowboys. Now they were the defending Super Bowl champions with Troy Aikman. 14, they bring in Bill Parcells, and I know that they're going to go another direction. They have a chance to draft Drew Bledsoe, which I get it. They should have done. And I get traded to the Cowboys, and that's one of those situations where now you're confronting, okay, if you're going to Dallas, you're not a starter. I tried to move small mountains to get myself into a situation to extricate myself from Atlanta and get to be a free agent. And then now I'm going to Dallas. I'm going to be a backup.
Yeah, it's Troy.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. But you're there, and again, there's lessons in every place we go, and all these different coaches that you played for and the players that you played with, like Troy, right? Yeah.
Michael Irvin and Emmett were on that team, and all those guys.
I've heard of those guys many times in terms of their work ethic and all the things that you can glean from that. So from there, then, though, your last stop is in Denver.
So I get word that Jerry Jones wants to see me after I get traded.
Jerry
Jones, the Dallas Cowboys. And so I come into this meeting with Jerry Jones, and it's just him and me. And he pulls up from the side of his desk, and we go sit by the sofa and a chair. And he's making small talk. And then he turns to the subject. He said, now, he goes, I'd walk across Texas to make a buck. He says, I got secretaries here, haven't got a raise in 5 years. I'm just listening. He goes, we got a little problem. He says, you're making more than Troy. And I looked at him and I said, well, I don't have a problem if Troy gets a raise. And he liked that one, but that's a true story. He was bringing me in there because he had to whack my salary down, that I had that starter salary. And Troy, despite being the number one overall pick, was still working on his rookie contract. But he was a Super Bowl champion, and it wasn't going to make a lot of sense for us to have that structure.
But nonetheless, you were in there dealing with these high-profile guys and being around Troy, and I know you're friends with him and some of the other guys on the Cowboys still, and what an amazing experience. So then from there, you go to Denver.
Yeah, go to Denver, and Tommy Maddox had been drafted in the first round from UCLA. He was kind of there, the presumptive backup. Obviously, John Elway was the entrenched starter. There was no debating that, but for me, it was a competition with Tommy Maddox. And I ended up winning that job, and so now I'm the backup to John Elway. And it's really, in many ways, like I said, a blessing to be around legends of the game, because this guy's a real, true, bona fide John Wayne hero of the game. John Elway, I've always maintained, and I've never had anybody refute my contention. John Elway is the number one of number ones. And what I mean by that is he was the first overall pick in the 1983 draft. If you took a time machine and you could plop him in any year, go put him in the 68 draft with O.J. Simpson, Elway's the number one. Put him in the Bubba Smith draft, Elway's number one. Put him in the Peyton Manning draft, Elway's number one. Put him in the Troy Aikman draft, Elway's number one. Elway is the number one of number ones. That's how highly regarded he was as a collegian entering into the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I played against him, of course, at Washington. You know, he played at Stanford, and I saw him pull off some unbelievable magic, and never seen a guy with that kind of arm throw from the right to the left side of the field, or from left going back to the right, too, in just amazing ways. His power and strength and ingenuity and his athleticism, truly amazing. But, okay, so we've been talking a long time about really your life and how it's unfolded. And at the end of the day, people ask, oh, so did you retire? And really what the truth of the matter is I got kicked out. You know, I like to sell it. Something great happened. I made the last winning catch of the Super Bowl to win and go on to the Hall of Fame career, but I didn't, and nor did you. But at the same time, you got to have all these amazing relationships, as I mentioned before. You're really defined by that. And even today, right? I mean, you're a quarterback. You're a tremendous student of the game. I think because you're able to be around all these great players, you could see their work ethic. You had that work ethic. You had to do that in order to get to where you got. It led you into this amazing broadcasting career. So if anybody out there is wondering why Hugh sounds a lot better than me on this podcast, it's because one of the reasons why he has been with KJR, analyst for that station here in Seattle, a lot for the Seahawks and for the Huskies for the last, 19 years now?
Yeah, this is 19th year mark, yep.
Which is, this blows my way. It blows me away. And you're also one of three, I think you guys are the original guys, you're still together, of the Husky Honks, right? Which is kind of the whole pre-post game before Husky games.
Pre and post game before Husky games. And Dick Baird and Dave Mahler, dear friends, that we have vastly different personalities, but we have that commonality with our affinity and our affection to the University of Washington and football program. So it keeps me close to the game. It was something that I didn't reach out to try and pursue this, I call it avocation, because I'm not trying to make a career out of it, but I do take it seriously, and I try and prepare. And for me, Mark, if you go to an opera, they give you what's called a libretto. It kind of helps you understand. I don't think you have to have a libretto to enjoy opera, but it helps. And so I think one of the challenges, I wasn't far from a great player or even a good player, but I played with a lot of great players, and I was around some of the best coaches. And so if you just pay attention, you pick up a little bit about football. So to me, I know there's football fans out there that want to know more about the game. So if I can impart something that I've learned, libretto is really just Italian translation, right? You don't have to be a genius to know Italian. There's 5-year-olds that are fluent Italian all through Italy, but you have to be exposed to it, right? So you have to be exposed to football to understand some of the nuances and some of the strategies of the game. So for me, I just look at it as a challenge to try and communicate that. And it keeps me close to the game, and it's a nice diversion and connection that keeps me close to a game that has been really good to me.
Well, it's part of your DNA, so it makes sense, and glad it's worked out that way. So kind of the last thing as we wrap this up, again, we kept talking about you have had these start and stops throughout. At the end of the day, you keep going. You keep marching up that mountain. And so for you, for anybody that's have gone through any kind of adversity or whatnot, is there any one like golden nugget that you walk away with saying, my one advice is blank?
I would say I've had to think about this because one of the other blessings in my life has been able to be a youth football coach for both of my sons. And I did that for 9 years. But if you count the seasons with both kids, it was more like 15 years because of 15 seasons. And so you have to crystallize your thoughts in these areas. And what I tell them, it's a message dedicated to middle school kids, but I think it applies to everybody. And I try and employ it and I say, look, toughness in a person. It's not about who hits the hardest on a football field. It's not about the bully on the playground, the biggest kid who intimidates and acts like a jerk and steals the lunch money or something from the kids. In my thought, toughness is what happens when life gives you a kick and sets you down. And how do we respond? Do we feel sorry for ourselves or do we battle? Do we just get some grit, have some grit, and somehow find it within ourselves to battle and not feel sorry for ourselves? So I think that God in his wisdom has laid out a plan that we're all going to have those setbacks. And that's supposed to be the enriching part of it, that we have hurdles and we try and conquer them with grit and battle. So
I absolutely love that. I actually did a podcast with a Dallas Cowboy that I climbed down in Tanzania with Corey Proctor. He was an offensive lineman, big guy, great guy. I'm actually from Gig Harbor, Washington. Went to the University of Montana. And majority of our talk was all about grit, kind of the key word that
it's a good word, isn't it?
I love that word. And we really went into a lot of depth on that word and how you get that and how you maintain it. And he's gone through some adversity himself. But anyways, very wise words. And listen, I so appreciate you coming on. And we've been longtime buddies, but rarely do we sit down and have a conversation like this about all the detail. Yeah. And there's a lot of things I learned.
The Wayback Machine. Yeah,
the Wayback Machine. And cool to travel in time and talk about old things. But at the end of the day, look, I've had my shots and you've had your shots, but you got to keep standing up and going after those dreams that you want to aspire to and not let anybody turn you back. And it's never over till it's over. And you keep going, and you've been a great example of that.
Well, you've been a really instrumental part of my life, Mark, and in some of those areas where, as I said, the direction is balancing on a blade of a knife. You were there to direct me in ways that ultimately proved to be really immensely positive and constructive to me. So I'm honored and humbled that you'd asked me to do this and that people would take the time to listen to somebody who made no mark on the game. But I'm just like everybody else in terms of trying to manage these setbacks. But it's great to spend this time with you, Mark.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you remember, it always takes a village. So you're part of that village, brother.
Okay.
All right, buddy?
Good enough. All right, pal.
All right, thank you. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. If you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.